So last week I brought you the debate that happened in Parliament over the pro-Israel lobbying of our UK politics and our democracy. And at the end of that, at the end of the research, I told you that we took quite a lot out of the research. There were a lot of things that became documented. So from that point of view, it's something that we can actually move forward with because the documentation is there. So it's not like we're saying, oh, Israel is lobbying our government and we're being told that it's a conspiracy theory. Well, no. After the debate, we have documented evidence that that is the case. So after covering the debate, I started to think about basically what are the next steps? Where do we go from there? Like, we've effectively, the debate quashed us as UK citizens, or so they thought. And they basically told us to shut up. If you remember the man Lamont, who said that if it comes up again, it should have more than 100,000 signatures, and the petitions committee should effectively try to ignore it so that we don't get anything. And it made me wonder what it is about this foreign government that has our government spooked so much. So I did a bit of a dive, and that's what I want to bring you today. Okay, so I'm going to change everything around. There we are. So this today is about the fallout and following on from the debate. So what we've worked out is more scrutiny is definitely needed. Okay. So if you remember, Adam Khalil was the petition organizer. And on Monday, the 29th, the debate happened on the 22nd. On Monday, the 29th, Khalil submitted a formal complaint about the June 22nd, 2026 debate. Among his primary concerns, he said in his complaint, was the repeated characterization of the petition, its signatories, and several MPs who spoke in support of it as anti-Semitic. Now, I brought that to you last week. I showed you exactly what the puppeticians who were against the petition said. The debate did little to address fundamental questions relating to lobbying, political donations, parliamentary visits, transparency, or influence, his complaint said, which is true. We found that, we looked at that. The MPs, the independent MPs that stood and argued for the petition asked questions and they were never answered. Instead, it demonstrated why many people believe greater scrutiny is necessary. It certainly did. He has asked that the government review whether it met the standards expected of such debates and for it to be rerun. So not a new petition where Lamont says that it's got to have over 100,000 signatures now. No, what Andy Khalil is saying is effectively the debate didn't run. It didn't run. Nothing was resolved at all. And it did, in his view and in my view, and probably your view if you watched last week's Research Hub, the standards expected of those type of debates, they certainly weren't met. So Andy's wanting to see if we can rerun the debate, which I think is a good thing. And I would argue it needs to be done. But it did still have me thinking about the amount of trips that were taken and paid for by the Israel lobby and the trips that were taken by our puppeticians. And I wondered how many countries do that kind of thing. How it had to be documented. So I did a bit of research and found, now this is it surprised me. Foreign trips registered since 2024 since the 2024 general election. So the rank at the top. Now, the reason it's ranked at the top is not because of the amount of trips. It's ranked at the top because of the amount of money that was spent. So it comes down to the finances. And the finances were in question when it came to our debate. But Qatar, or Qatar, is at the top with 28 trips, totaling £180,939 for 28 trips. Now, you could argue that going to Qatar is an expensive thing to do anyway, so that's why the value of the trip is so high. But 28 trips, and Israel comes in second with 28 trips as well. And the value of those trips is £98,653. So still a very high amount. Next comes Taiwan. Then we have Ukraine, Switzerland, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Cyprus, United Arab Emirates, and Jordan. There are 8 other countries, but they were the top 10, and I couldn't fit any more on my slide. But they're the top 10. So the grand total of trips for the top 10 is 143 trips taken by our politicians to these countries, and funded trips to the tune of £631,453. Now, we've spoken about when our puppeticians take trips before, and it's not because the people who fund those trips like them. It's in order for a quid pro quo. It's we'll fund this trip, and then when we want to have your ear, when it comes to a debate, when it comes to anything decision making at parliamentary level, just remember that we funded your trip. So, like I say, all in all, there are 18 countries that do these lobbying tactics, foreign trips. And all countries total was 165. That's why I left off the last 8. I wasn't too worried about leaving off the last 8, because they only account for a very small portion. And the difference in the value is 631 to 694. So the value of the trips was less as well. But obviously, I'm looking at it off the back of the debate from last week, and I'm particularly interested in Israel. And it did make me think, why are our politicians so averse to discussing Israel in any way, shape or form? Is it because they would not be able to discuss it favorably because they actually themselves think that what Israel is doing is not great in Palestine? That was one thought that I had. And I thought, well, the best way to not discuss it and not get yourself in trouble as a politician is to obfuscate. And that's what they did. They obfuscated. It was all about anti-Semitic rhetoric. That was their answers. That was the context of their answers all the time. Anti-Semitic rhetoric. It was all about conspiracy theories. And I just found it really telling that none of them would discuss anything other than that. And that's the rhetoric that we're fed. Like, you can't criticize Israel because it's anti-Semitic. And I don't agree. I don't agree at all. Obviously, I don't agree. So I then thought to myself, okay, so why? Why are our politicians possibly so captured that they're frightened to even discuss these things? So my dive took me to this. And I'm not sure if this is something you've ever encountered or heard about. So I'm going to cover it now as a possible explanation of why our government refuses to speak out against Israel, and also as an explanation of not just our government here in the UK, but why other governments may well refuse to speak out. about Israel. So it's called the Samson option. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through it. So what it is, does it play a part in Western decision making? So not just the UK, and how this might feed into Israeli influence on UK politics and democracy. Okay. So what is the Samson option? The Samson option refers to Israel's presumed nuclear deterrence doctrine of last resort. The implied threat that if Israel faced existential destruction, it would deploy nuclear weapons against its enemies, regardless of consequences. And if you look at Israel, they have never admitted to having nuclear. Well, so they've never admitted. It's generally understood that they're not part of the non-proliferation agreement. So if you are a nuclear armed country, then you abide by certain rules. Because Israel's never declared that they're a nuclear armed country, they don't have to abide by any rules. But everybody seems to know that they are. And the general consensus is that Israel has these nuclear warheads aimed at quite a few different countries, just in case. So it's quite dire. Now, the name Samson comes from biblical Samson, who pulled down the temple on himself and his enemies simultaneously. So it was first described in detail by investigative journalist Seymour Hersh in his 1991 book of the same name, drawing on intelligence sources. So it was Seymour Hersh that brought it to us initially. But Israel has never confirmed or denied its nuclear arsenal, a policy known as nuclear ambiguity. But it's widely accepted by intelligence agencies and defense analysts globally that Israel possesses a substantial nuclear capacity. So that's what the Samson option is. So at a strategic level, when it comes to Western decision making, no Western government will openly discuss Israeli nuclear weapons. America, in particular, has maintained a formal posture of neither confirming nor denying Israeli nuclear capability, which is itself a form of protection. So America's never come out and said this, they have got nukes. This silence isn't accidental. It's a deliberate policy choice that insulates Israel from the non-proliferation pressures that are applied to countries like Iran, North Korea, and others. That double standard has a strategic rationale rooted partly in nuclear anxiety. So that could be a reason why Western societies will not speak out at a strategic level. Now, at a diplomatic level, when it comes to Western decision making, the concept of Israeli existential security, that Israel must never be allowed to face destruction, is embedded so deeply in the US and Western foreign policy frameworks that it functions almost as an accepted rule rather than a debatable position. They utilised it in the debate on the 22nd of June. It was all about anti-Semitic rhetoric and conspiracy theory. So they utilised that at the diplomatic level. So when Western governments talk about Israel's right to defend itself, which we hear all the time, in terms that seem to have no upper limit, the implicit backdrop to that framing is the fear of what a genuinely cornered Israel would do. So at a diplomatic level, they're treading on eggshells because they don't know whether Israel would deploy nukes if the worst came to the worst. So nobody at a diplomatic level wants to speak out. Captured. Now, from a human psychological level in Western decision making, decision makers in Washington, London, and Brussels are aware, even if they never say so publicly, that Israel is a nuclear armed state in a volatile region. That awareness inevitably shapes the boundaries of pressure they are willing to apply. So there's a reason no Western government has moved from words to genuine coercive action, despite the scale of what is happening in Gaza. Fear of unpredictable escalation by a nuclear armed state under existential pressure is a rational, if unspoken, constraint. So from the psychological level, it feeds into Western decision making. And this is in Israel's own words. So in October 2023, Israeli Heritage Minister Amichai Eliyahu, a government minister, publicly suggested that dropping a nuclear bomb on Gaza was one of the options. So they've hinted. He was suspended from cabinet meetings following the statement, but the fact that a serving minister said it publicly and that it was treated as an embarrassment rather than an outrage requiring resignation or criminal investigation tells you something about the environment in which these discussions happen. Okay, so that's in Israel's own words. They've effectively said they've got a nuclear because they threatened, albeit maybe, how can you joke about Gaza? But albeit jokingly, they threatened that that was one of the options open to them. So they have kind of admitted that they have it. Now, my thoughts. I really think that the nuclear dimension is a genuine background factor in Western decision making and Western calculations. And it operates as a kind of unstated ceiling on how much pressure governments are willing to apply when it comes to Israel. It's the elephant in the room of virtually every high-level discussion about Israel that never gets named in public discourse. If the Samson option does function as an implicit constraint on Western policy, it means that a nuclear arsenal acquired outside the Non-Proliferation Treaty, never declared, never inspected, is effectively shaping the foreign policy of democratic governments in ways their own citizens are never told about and cannot therefore democratically scrutinise, which is exactly what we had on the June 22nd debate. This is a profound accountability problem that sits alongside and arguably underpins everything else we witnessed in the debate. This is my opinion. I'm not stating it as fact, that's my opinion. So we need to have a better understanding. If this is what the backdrop is, if the Samson option is the backdrop that the UK will not speak out against Israel, if that's the backdrop, we need to know what agreements we in the UK have with Israel. So what UK-Israel agreements are in place? And there are multiple classified UK-Israel agreements that the British public were explicitly denied access to. So I found three: the 2020 Military Cooperation Agreement, the Project HES UK, I don't know if that's how you say it, HES UK or HESUK, but HES UK is what I'm going to say, and the 2023 Roadmap. So we'll just highlight what each of those is. So the 2020 Military Cooperation Agreement, our Ministry of Defence refuses to disclose the agreement in full, saying to do so could harm the UK's interests internationally and would be likely to prejudice the capability and effectiveness of our armed forces. The Freedom of Information response also confirmed it is the only agreement the Ministry of Defence has signed with Israel, suggesting it provides the basis for the full range of UK military support. Pro-Israel lobby group BICOM has written that under this agreement, the two militaries are integrating their multi-domain capabilities in maritime, land, air, space, and cyber and electromagnetic. So this is all in place, but we're not allowed to know the contents of that agreement. We're not allowed. It's hidden, but it's in our name. It's in our name as UK citizens that we are in agreement with Israel over all these points. Project HES UK. So Declassified UK uncovered this, and it's a separate secret, again, UK agreement with Israel, codenamed HES UK, which began in 2019 to 2020, and it involved the British military devising a project to improve Israel's capability to confront Iran and Hezbollah. This was back in 2019. The defence plan focused on 5 key areas: strengthening the intelligence relationship, so information, improving military capabilities, liaising with the Israeli security establishment, so that would be Mossad, seeking defence prosperity opportunities, and accessing overflight permissions. So we fly over and give information to Israel on strategic targets. More about that in a minute. And the 2023 roadmap. In March 2023, Britain and Israel signed a roadmap committing both states to tackle shared threats as part of a close strategic partnership. Now, all of these feel like they're follow-ons from the 2020 agreement, with extensive defence and security cooperation, including commitments to take decisive and concerted actions against globally designated terrorists. Now, when we think about terrorists, we think, oh, bad people, and then we think about the Palestine Action, who are not bad people. They just refuse to stand quietly by while a genocide is happening in our name, because the UK is complicit in that genocide, and they've been deemed terrorists. So under the 2023 roadmap, Israel and the UK can take decisive and concerted actions against them. The then Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, he's not Foreign Secretary anymore, has said this accord is being reviewed, but it's never been revoked, and we haven't found out what the review was, but he's no longer in post. So, okay. So in practice, what have these agreements enabled? These 3 agreements that we have with Israel? Well, I've spoken to you before about our base in Cyprus at Kriteri. So Royal Air Force flights have continued throughout the Gaza campaign through ceasefires, bombing raids, and mounting allegations of war crimes. On the 8th of June 2024, when Israeli forces stormed Nusrat refugee camp, killing 274 Palestinians, our aircraft were present in the skies. So whether Britain's aircraft are gathering intelligence for hostage recovery or enabling a broader and more lethal campaign remains deliberately unclear. And Declassified UK brought a video out that shows Starmer in Kriteri in Cyprus effectively telling the troops that what they're doing cannot be spoken about in the UK. If that's the case, what are they doing? I would say enabling a broader and more lethal campaign. UK backing has included numerous high-level military meetings in Britain and Israel, the guarantee of immunity from prosecution for Israeli officers visiting the UK, and spy flights over Gaza in aid of Israeli intelligence. So that, in practice, has been happening. So what does this all mean? So these agreements create a structural military entanglement that makes it extremely difficult for the UK to withdraw support, even if they wanted to. Even if we wanted to, we couldn't withdraw support because of these agreements being in place. So once your intelligence apparatus, your training programs, your airbase infrastructure on Cyprus, so that's Akrotiri, and your classified operational commitments are woven together with another state's military over years and decades, the relationship develops its own institutional momentum that operates largely outside democratic scrutiny. So all of this is happening and we're not allowed to know about it. We're not allowed to democratically debate it. We're not allowed to democratically oppose it. There is strong sense of democratic deficit. The agreements and initiatives are generally opaque and sometimes classified. Successive UK governments have been vocally and materially supportive of Israel, even as substantial majorities of the British public poll as pro-ceasefire. So us citizens don't agree with what's going on, and we're making it more and more known. We're making it known with our pennies when we're boycotting Israeli goods. There are campaigns on boycotting Israeli goods. We're making it known with our votes. We don't want pro-Israeli puppeticians in power. We're making it known with our vote. But the most damning element, this agreement has remained in place throughout the period during which Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, who is wanted by the ICC, so that's the International Criminal Court for war crimes, including starvation as a method of warfare and intentionally directing attacks against civilians, was in office. That was apparently insufficient to prompt any review. Now, we're a member of the ICC. Declassified UK has suggested the reason for the information blackout to the public and Parliament may be to protect British ministers from being prosecuted for complicity in war crimes. And I would suggest that Declassified UK have hit the nail right on the head. So how do these agreements tie into what happened in the debate? Okay, well, we have documented, evidenced pattern of classified military entanglement between the UK and Israel that bypasses parliamentary scrutiny. It defies freedom of information requests and has continued unmodified throughout a genocide that international courts are actively adjudicating. The British public are not permitted to know the terms of the commitments made in our name with our taxes and potentially implicating us in international law violations. This is precisely why the lobbying transparency question from the debate matters so much. The secret agreements, the classified military cooperation, the RAF flights over Gaza, none of this can be properly scrutinised while the financial and political relationship that sustain it remains equally opaque. So my assessment of the scale of the problem. So what we've mapped across like our chat today is not a simple lobbying issue. It isn't a simple lobbying issue. It's a layered system of classified military agreements, undisclosed financial relationships, conflicting parliamentary representation, and institutional momentum that has developed over decades, largely outside democratic view. Extracting a country from this requires sustained multi-front pressure rather than any single action. So if we want to get out of this mess, we are going to have to mount a sustained multi-front pressure action. So approximate interim next steps. So what can we do? How can we move forward with this? So the first thing we can do is we can demand that all the Friends of Israel groups and all the equivalents from all other countries as well, not just Friends of Israel, because we've got Labour Friends of Israel, Conservative Friends of Israel, Reform Friends of Israel, but all of the equivalent groups from all countries register formally as lobbying organisations with full donor disclosure. So just like they have AIPAC in America, we need something like that in the UK. Possible next steps: pushing for mandatory declaration of conflicts of interest before MPs speak on related topics in any debate. That debate on the 22nd of June, all, as I said last week, all of the politicians that were against it had taken money from Israel. Every single one of them. They'd declared it in their financial records, but they did not voice it at the debate, and they should have. It should be mandatory declaration. Supporting Andy's formal complaint about the speaking slot allocation as well. Remember, 82% of speakers spoke against the petition, and only 18% of time was allotted to those who were speaking for the petition. So that was outrageous, and we need to support Andy when it comes to his formal complaint. So writing to PACAC or the Foreign Affairs Select Committee to pursue the unanswered questions from the debate, particularly the Elbit Home Office meetings and the Electoral Commission referral of Labour Friends of Israel. And supporting investigative journalists like Declassified UK, who are doing the evidential groundwork. So we need to support our alternative journalists, but I would argue in that as well, we need to support independent MPs that have been pushing for these questions to be answered. But I've put watch this space because there's more to come. There is more to come. I'm putting together an action plan that I'm going to bring to you over a number of weeks so that it's not all done in one hit. But for today, this kind of gives you a backdrop of information that you can sit and think about why our politicians are so captured by the Israeli government that they can't even answer questions in a direct debate about pro-Israeli influence on our UK politics and democracy. And it's really important that we have some form of understanding about why that might be.